Mike Geig. I am an evangelist at Unity Technologies. I have begun the journey of learning Spanish, but for the sake of today, I'm going to stick to English. I think it's probably safer. So I wanted to ask, and I'm trying to make this work for everybody here. So show of hands, who has currently or who has used Unity's navigation features before? Excellent. Has anyone used the, oh, there we go. Has anyone used the ones from Unity 5.6, the new ones yet? Mostly not? Fantastic. So we've all can think about using these assets or the nav mesh stuff that's built into Unity, and we all know there are difficulties with the ways they were set up, right? There were a lot of limitations. You couldn't do anything dynamically. It all had to be done, during edit time. You couldn't have different types of nav meshes. You couldn't orient them to different axes. There was a lot of specification that made it difficult to use. And so what I'd like to do is talk about how that's changed and talk about these new features that is making the whole process a lot easier and allowing us to use nav meshes in all kinds of games that we couldn't before. And not just games, other kinds of projects as well. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And like I said, my name is Mike Geig. I'm a technical evangelist with Unity Technologies. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So in Unity 5.6, we announced two really big changes to the way navigation worked in Unity. So the first is a low-level API of the programming interface. And this low-level API is built into the engine. You can reference it straight through the engine. It's got a lot of really cool stuff that you're probably never going to use, all right? You might, but it's super powerful stuff, and that's great, and it gives us a lot of control, a lot of access to these nav meshes, how they're made, and what we can do with them. But that's not really what I'm here to talk to you about. Instead, I want to talk to you about this other thing, the high-level components that Unity's built and made available to you that interfaces with that low-level API and allows you to access all those really powerful new features without writing a lot of code or doing anything really crazy or difficult, right? So we're trying to approach this from a minimum amount of code necessary to get artificial intelligence path navigation working in our games. Now, these high-level components, I'm tangled, there we go. These high-level components are the things that we're going to interface mostly with, and those are the nav mesh surface. And the nav mesh surface replaces the old navigation window and allows us to have a lot of control over how our nav meshes are made and where they're made. We also have nav mesh links, which replace the old off mesh links. These nav mesh links gives us actually a broad width of navigation channels to move between nav meshes, as opposed to the original links, which were single point to single point, very static. We also have nav mesh modifiers, which are areas that allow us to modify how nav meshes are built and what they do. And then we have nav mesh modifier volumes, which allows us to modify the space above a nav mesh to determine what it does to the nav mesh, right? And so using these four, we can do a lot of really powerful stuff with navigation. And what you're going to see is pretty much every reason you couldn't use navigation before, you now can use our nav meshes for. Right, even 2D games if you wanted to. There's really no reason you can't use the nav mesh stuff. That's not true. I've challenged anyone to come up with a situation where the new nav mesh solution won't work, and 1 out of 15 people or 15 suggestions found one, and I still found a way around it, so technically none of them, but yeah. So let's take a look at this. Let's see how it works. All right. So I'm going to come over here to Unity, and what I have is just a simple setup right here, and I'm going to pay attention right now to this object, nav mesh builder. There's nothing on here that's nav mesh stuff, nothing here navigation. This just controls my player and my shark running. There's nothing to do with nav meshes yet. But what I'm going to do is instead of going to this navigation window and bake, which we're not going to use this window anymore, instead, I'm just going to go to add component, navigation, and then I have a nav mesh surface. I'm going to add this to the game object itself. It is now a component. And it's set to humanoid. It's going to collect all objects. It's going to bake everything. I'm just going to hit bake. And there we go. It bakes this nav mesh. Now, this is a common problem we've seen in games, right? So I run, My player runs, my shark catches me, and my head falls into some spices. All right, that's classic. Now, the problem is this. The shark is bigger than my player. While my player can fit between these two carts, the shark probably shouldn't be able to. But a previous issue with the nav meshes is you only get one and everything is the same size. So my shark, which is really big, shouldn't be the same size as my player. So here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to add a second nav mesh surface. So add component, navigation, nav mesh surface. And this time for my agent type, I've actually set up a second agent type named shark. Now I can have 2, 3, 4, 10 different types of agents. My shark is wider than my other person, and I'm going to hit bake. And what I will see is I get a second nav mesh. Right? So I have 2 that are overlaid. And now I'm going to go to my shark, and my shark has a nav mesh agent, and I'm going to say, you know what? You're not a humanoid, you're a shark. And as such, the shark won't be able to make it through, but my player will. And then my player will do a dance, and I have some confetti there. But it doesn't just end there. So the nav mesh builder game object is just some game object, and I put a nav mesh surface on it. Since the nav mesh surface is on a game object, the nav mesh is on a game object. If I move that game object, the nav mesh goes with it. I can even create a prefab that has a nav mesh on it. And now my prefabs can have nav meshes. So I'm going to go to my prefabs folder. Here I have demo1 extension, drop it into my scene, and you'll note it has a nav mesh. I didn't bake that. It was already on there. And it's vertically aligned. It's not the floor, it's the wall. And so what I can do now, I'll just hit play again. My player will run, do that little thing, I'll talk about that in a second, and then run up the wall and win. All right? And so I can traverse between 2 nav meshes at runtime. And I'm doing that using this little thing here. This is our nav mesh link, formerly the off mesh link. But now you'll see instead of it being a single point, it's a plane. So the player can be anywhere on that plane and move to anywhere else on that plane. It's not like I have to get to one central spot and then jump anywhere along those vertical lines. And I can move it at runtime. All right? As long as it touches 2 nav meshes, they are connected. All right? Now, you saw the player sort of flop. The player can only be aligned to 1 nav mesh at a time. I could have written a bunch of code to make it gracefully move, but I spent all my time on that confetti particle blast, and I didn't have time for anything else. But that's just, you can do a lot with that. So let's look at another scenario, kind of talking again about that alignment. Here I have a scene where I have this platform, right there. It has a nav mesh baked on it, and I've got a character. So I'll hit play. And this is nothing new. We just have a character walking around this flat platform. But I'm at runtime. You see I'm at runtime here. I'm running. She's moving. Now if I click, I can change the orientations of my nav mesh at runtime. Now, unfortunately, I can't move her while it's moving. I can, but she does a weird spinning thing as it's trying to recalculate a moving nav mesh. But if she just resumes once I let go, she can just keep doing that, right? So we have a lot of control over the orientation of our nav meshes at runtime dynamically. Not only, how they're built, but where they align to and what our players can do with them. All right? Another demo I want to show you here is this. It's going to be very easy to make a nav mesh because this is empty. But more specifically, I don't have a level, right? There's nothing here. Everything is going to be procedurally generated at runtime. Traditionally, I can't use nav meshes for that. So I'll hit play, and I get a maze. Just to prove the point, I'm going to leave play mode and come back, and it'll be a different maze. All right, it is procedurally generated, so it's a different one each time. I haven't pre-done any secret stuff here. And so what I'm going to do is, let me click on my world builder there, and I can see once the maze was built, my nav mesh was calculated. Now, if you don't believe me, I have a script that allows me to right-click and delete the nav mesh. No nav mesh. I'll click again, rebuilds it. dynamically as I want. Now that I have a nav mesh, I can just walk around in my nav mesh. If I wanted to, I could say, oops. I could walk on over here. I could grab this piece of ground and move it up and move this one maybe down. I don't know why I'm doing that. It's gonna be hard to walk. Whatever, just now, if I want, I will see that my nav mesh isn't correct anymore because I've moved some objects. Again, all I need to do, click, rebuild. Now, you might be thinking, okay, how did I click to rebuild? How did I right-click to remove? How much code is required? How difficult is this? Well, let me show you. Here's my script. And my script says, if I left-click my mouse, bake my nav mesh. If I right-click my mouse, remove my nav mesh. Think we can figure this one out. Think we got this, all right? There are a lot of really complex things we could do. I could have the system build my nav mesh without baking it first, give me that mesh, modify that mesh, add stuff to it, and then pass it back into the system to turn it into this weird nav mesh. But if all I want is navigation, that's all it takes. Simple, right? And that's what we're going for here. Lots of power if I want to have lots of power, lots of simplicity if I want lots of simplicity, right? That's what we're aiming for. So I'm going to come back here so we can see this, but I'm going to take this one step further. In play mode still, all right? I'm not leaving play mode. I am going, you know, actually, never mind, I lied. I'm going to leave play mode, and I'm going to do this again just because I forgot I had screwed up my whole ground there. So I'm in play mode. My character's walking around. Now, while I'm in play mode, without leaving, I'm going to go to my prefabs, and I'm going to bring this one back in. Still in play mode. And there she goes. I didn't even rebake anything. I didn't even unbake, rebake, nothing. Just by virtue of moving it there, it had a nav mesh. I had a nav mesh link. Nav mesh link says, I'm touching two nav meshes. They are linked. And there you go. All right? Quite simplistic. I actually have no idea what happens if I move this with her on it. Oh, hey, that's fun. I didn't know that. So, And then I'll just have her come back down. Boop, there we go. All right, quite simplistic. So there's one final scenario I want to talk about. And it's a very special scenario, but it surprisingly happens to a lot of people. So let's say, I'm going to go to this new scene here, and I'm going to do just a real quick alignment here, which will help. So let's say I have a big open world. We're pretending this is a big open world. It's just a little park or whatever. But let's say I'm building a huge level, okay? And even if I didn't need dynamic baking, let's say I just baked the traditional way, right? Just bake my nav mesh. But my level is so big that my nav mesh is gigantic, and the memory input or imprint of that is too big. I can't load on mobile, maybe. It takes up too much memory. I can't have a nav mesh this large. It takes too long to bake, and then it's just too big. Traversing it takes a long time. It even maybe allocates arrays of points to travel through that's just too many, and it just doesn't work. So here's what we can do instead. So I've got, like I said, this environment right here. I'm sorry, that's the one I want, this area baker right there. And so we can see right now it's baked this whole park, but if I hit play, all right, I don't need the whole park, right? I just need the little section that I'm in. All of this other stuff is wasted. That memory is wasted. It's not doing me any good. I'm not checking it. I'm not moving to it. I'm just staying right here, just within the park. And I can even see which of these little areas that I'm currently in. All the rest of this unused. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to this game object, area baker. It's got a nav mesh surface. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the nav mesh surface. So we can do a lot of the granular stuff we used to be able to do, so walkables, not walkables, jumps. We can do our own voxels, sizes, and we can get really, really complex with that. And by the way, in upcoming versions of Unity, we're adding a whole bunch of debug features so we can actually see the voxel calculation process and see how little maybe errors are happening and fix them right here in the editor, which is super cool. But besides the advanced stuff, I also have the ability to say, maybe I don't want to build my nav meshes based off render meshes. Maybe I want colliders instead. That's fine. I could just use colliders instead of graphical meshes if I want. I can also choose which layers can be part of a nav mesh. But here's what's really cool, all right? I don't necessarily have to collect all objects, right? This is a nav mesh surface component on an object. I don't necessarily want every object. I just maybe want this object. So I could bake based off of children, use the hierarchy. Anything that is me or my children get a nav mesh, everything else does not. They can have their own nav meshes if they want one, right? That's super powerful. It's not like when I say bake, I'm baking everything. I'm just baking this one thing, and that's really cool. But I can also do this. I can bake a volume, and I can just choose how big. I'm doing a 20 by 20. And by baking a volume, I just get a little bit. Now, my player, the person that's moving around here, she's got her standard nav mesh agent. I have a script here called agent area baker. I'll show you in a moment, right? But I'm just going to turn that on, and it basically says, hey, if she moves 5 units or more from where she was, rebake the nav mesh. So now, when I hit play, she only gets the area around her, and as she moves, it only bakes the area around her. Now, this baking is set up to be very intelligent, all right? So when most of these blocks don't move, they're not rebaked. It just reuses that data. It only bakes the new blocks, removes the old ones, bakes the new ones, and most of the ones in the center aren't touched. And this is highly, not serialized, serialized, run side by side. It's highly efficient, it's threaded, it's happening behind the scenes asynchronous for you, and so it's not gonna bog your game down as it's happening. And my memory input is a fraction of what it was. Because I'm not calculating this huge world, I'm only calculating the pieces around me that prevent me from running into that or through that tree or running out of that wall. These walls and the trees, none of them have colliders on them, right? I don't have any colliders in this whole scene. The nav mesh is what's preventing me from running through that tree, through that wall, through those fences. And I'm only getting the ones immediately around me, and we can see that here, right? So again, highly powerful, highly specialized, and let me show you the code. Very simple code. I'll open this up. And so here what we're doing is we're just saying, hey, if we've moved more than 5 units, right, update our mesh. Our mesh says, hey, remove our data, move our mesh baker to where the player is, bake our data. That's it. 80% of that nav mesh is left alone because it hasn't changed. We just cut off a little bit at the front, and we add a little bit, or cut off a little bit at the back, add a little bit at the front, right? So a very fast, simple procedure. It's memory efficient, right? And it works all platforms, all types of games. So using these together, I know I don't have an example here for the nav mesh modifiers, but they work kind of like nav mesh obstacles used to. So kind of the similar thing for doorways and stuff like that. But using these 4 components, the nav mesh surface, the nav mesh link, the nav mesh modifier, and the modifier volume, we can achieve all sorts of crazy cool stuff that we couldn't do before, right? The ability to just build stuff in real time, runtime, right? Dynamically, bake it or don't bake it, just put in your prefabs and then it's just there. And just because you have your links, it just all works together. It's all very, very cool. Coming soon, we have all of these new testing and debugging and stuff being added to this, which again, just makes it really easy to do this all through the editor. So now, if you were to open Unity 5.6 right now, you would go into nav mesh and you would not see nav mesh surface, nav mesh link, nav mesh volume, or modifier. And you think, where are they? Well, here's where they are. We are storing, I know, a lot of people like this, a lot of people hate it, but let me tell you this. Storing these things separate from the main version of Unity is a pain because you've got to go download it, but it means we can update our nav meshes as often as we want without having you to download an entire version of Unity, right? So if there's a bug with the nav mesh, you're not waiting until the next release of Unity, you're just going to the GitHub, right? So yeah, a lot of people like it, a lot of people hate it, but it does free up our release cycles so you can get the newest, coolest things right away without waiting for us. The new debugging stuff, you're not going to have to wait for 2017.2. As soon as it is ready, it's going to be here, regardless of what version of Unity it is, right? That decoupling is a new thing we're doing. Some people love it, some people hate it, but trust me, once you get used to it, it's great. But you can go here and download this stuff, put it right into your project. There's also a whole bunch of samples here. that you can download, plus a whole bunch of extra code, little things that do weird stuff with the NavMesh API, in case you want to play around with it. But if you're looking to just get working, you grab these components, drop them in your project. Now you have all your NavMesh components, drop a surface on something, and you're done. All right? And it's very simple. It all works with the standard NavMesh agents that are already there and all that other NavMesh stuff. All right, fantastic. So thank you very much. If we have any questions, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll be around, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all have. But I really hope you guys try it out and build some really cool stuff with it. So thank you.